Let's go ahead and get started. So again, my name is Kevin Hancock. I'm Exostar's Director of Solutions, and I'll be doing today's session, how to complete your NIST self-assessment and calculate your SPRS score. So during today's session, I'll be covering not only, if you will, how to calculate that Sprs score manually and give you some tips and tricks on that, but also how to utilize Exostar's certification assistant to manage your overall CMMC program. And as part of that, obviously generate that score to upload into the SPRS system. If you'd like to try Certification Assistant, there is a 15-day free trial. That's at the URL you see there. You can also obviously find it on our website at www.exostar.com. So before I get started, just a few housekeeping details. Today's session is scheduled to last an hour, and that does include question and answer. You are muted during today's presentation. You can submit questions via the chat feature at any time. I will warn you, I'm also answering questions that were submitted when you registered for today's webinar. I usually have a person on the line with me answering chat, but with the summer season, I've got a couple people out on PTO, so they won't be. So at the end of today's session, I will also try to answer as many questions that came in via chat. I'll also follow up if I didn't get to your question via email with the answer to your question as well. If we do have an outage during today's session, just wait for a minute and try to reconnect. Just either refresh your web browser or use the link that you received via email to join today. If at any time you'd like to speak with one of our certification assistant experts, if you want to get a copy of this slide deck, it will be sent out to you as a follow-up to today's webinar, as well as a link to the recording. But for some reason you misplaced that, you can reach out to us as well to get that. And you can reach us in really two ways. You can reach us via email at cmmc-team@exostar.com. You can also go to our website, www.exostar.com. There's a chat feature there on every page, and we'd be more than happy to chat with you over that channel as well. So with that, let's dive into today's session. So I'm going to first cover kind of the current state of CMMC, where we are in the rulemaking process, the timeline for implementation, etc. I'm going to cover what goes into generating that SPRS score, cover the NIST 800-171 assessment as well, walk you through how to use Certification Assistant to do that self-assessment. As part of that, the tool itself will generate the SPRS score. I'll show you where to get that. We'll then do a quick review, and we'll answer any questions, again, that were either submitted via email before the session. I think I got 11 questions that were submitted prior when people registered. And then again, I'll cover any that came in the chat as time allows. So where are we in the CMMC rulemaking process? Hopefully, as all of you know, the proposed rule came out, as a late Christmas gift on 12/26 of 2023. That kicked off a public comment period for 60 days. Over 3,000 comments were submitted during those 60 days. And now the Department of Defense is going through, answering those questions, adjusting the proposed rule as appropriate, and then they'll be submitting the final rule. As part of that, they've also created all of the additional supporting materials that go along with that and posted those also into the Federal Registry. It's now expected that we'll see the CMMC rule be finalized in the first quarter of 2025. So sometime between December or I'm sorry, not December, January and March of 2025. And then there'll be that interim period, and then it'll start to show up in contracts, right? In looking at the current proposed rule as it is, some key things to keep in mind. So CMMC is all about moving away from a self-attestation model to one where now a third party is required to do an assessment of how you have implemented and whether or not you've fully implemented the controls necessary around controlled unclassified information, CUI. If you're trying to reach either level 2 or level 3, you'll be required to do a once every 3-year certified third-party assessment of your CMMC program and how you've implemented the controls. It clearly calls out NIST 800-171-R2, so revision 2. Earlier this year, a Rev 3 of NIST 800-171 was announced. However, in CMMC, it specifically calls out Rev 2, so please use those documents to understand the 110 controls that are necessary for you to adhere to. Every year, a senior company official is going to have to affirm that you continue to be compliant. You are allowed to have POAMs, and a POAM is a plan of action and milestone. So if you haven't implemented a particular control, you open what's called a POAM, the plan of action and milestone of how you're going to address that control and when you should have that implemented by. Those POAMs must be closed within 180 days, and only certain controls are allowed to have POAMs. And we'll cover that in a little bit when we start talking about the scoring of the controls themselves. Because the reason that's important is those controls that are worth a value of 5 or 3 cannot have POAMs against them. Only those with a score of 1 can have active POAMs, and actually it's a limited set of those 1-point controls, and we'll cover that as part of today's session. So just a reminder, right? CMMC is a 3-level program. Level 1 has 15 requirements to secure federal contract information, or FCI. Those 15 requirements are a subset of the 110 controls that are necessary to maintain or to achieve level 2 compliance. And level 2 is where you start to require those once every 3-year third-party assessments. On the left where you see those different percentages, that's the number of organizations within the defense industrial base that are expected to need to adhere to that particular level. So 63% of the organizations within the DIB are expected only to need level 1. Level 2 is 35 or 37%, and level 3 is less than 1%. Now, you do see that level 2 does have some number of self-assessments still allowed. The key caveat there is that those contracts that will allow a self-assessment for level 2 will depend on the contracting officer. So when the contract is let, it will identify whether or not it's okay for a self-assessment. It's expected, right, that that's going to be very minimal. So if you think you're going to go for contracts that have a level 2 requirement, you should really expect to have to do that third-party assessment. 2 kind of new terms were more fully fleshed out within the proposed rule, and they're important to us because a number of us use third parties to help us fulfill controls or leverage a particular service. And those two terms are an ESP, an external service provider, or a CSP, a cloud service provider. The ESPs are those organizations, typically you may think of these as MSPs or MSSPs, that help you fulfill particular controls, fulfill a particular IT function. And in those cases, those organizations that do that are going to have to be at the same CMMC level for which you are applying. So if you utilize an MSP as a portion of your IT organization or to help you out with some particular controls, etc., that organization will also have to be CMMC level 2. If you're utilizing a cloud service, and Exostar has some of these, one is our Exostar managed Microsoft 365 enclave solution to store, process, or transmit controlled unclassified information. In those cases, that cloud service provider's solution has to be FedRAMP moderate or a FedRAMP moderate equivalent solution. And they'll have to provide you that body of evidence that shows that they do that. So just some things to consider, both at kind of what level you're going to try to achieve, and as you look to leverage solutions from clouds, external parties, etc., some things to keep in mind when you engage with those folks. Now, when the CMMC plan was announced and the proposed rule came out, they also put out an implementation plan in which it will be adopted. And that's what you see here. So it's a 30-month phased period to fully implement CMMC. So when the rule goes final, there'll be a 6-month period of phase 1. That is where level 1 and level 2 will be still self-assessment. So kind of the current state. That'll give everyone a chance to actually engage with certified third parties to get those assessments done. Close any POAMs you have, right? Because again, it's a 6-month period to be able to close POAMs, etc. So in that first phase 1, that'll be kind of the get ready state. After that, you'll start to see CMMC level 2 and start to appear in new contracts. After that period, you'll start to see level 3 be required, and level 3 being required to have that third-party assessment. And with level 3 is when you start to see a DBCAC assessment. DBCAC is DoD's auditing agency. Rather than that certified third-party assessment organization, DoD will actually come out and do your assessment. And you'll also start to see level 2 certification assessment requirements appear in option year periods and at addendums and things like that to existing contracts. And then phase 4 is when we really hit full implementation. So just this is that timeline to keep in mind as we start to enter that final phase, and that phase 1 kicks in when the CMMC rule is finalized. And again, that's supposed to, we expect that to happen sometime in early 2025, that Q1 of 2025. And all indications are that we're moving right along to that. Now, that doesn't preclude what you need to do today. So if you've got current DoD contracts, please take a look just to make sure you're following what you need to do based on your current contracts. Because the requirement around NIST 800-171 is how you store, process, or transmit controlled unclassified information. You may be receiving that as part of contracts today. And if you've got the DFARS clauses you see there, 7012, 7019, 7020, you've already agreed to protect that controlled unclassified information in adherence with NIST 800-171. If you've got that 7019 clause, you're also required to do that self-assessment against those controls, generate that score of how you're doing, and then enter that score into the supplier performance risk system. That SPRS score is only seen by the DoD. It goes into your overall risk score as a supplier to the Department of Defense. You may also be receiving, questionnaires or requests from various prime contractors to let them know your SPRS score, things like that. They absolutely have the rights to ask those questions. They're required by these agreements to flow down these requirements to their subcontractors. So they must ensure that their supply chain also meets these requirements. And so they may be asking you as well on these things. And you may be receiving these forms from other Exostar applications as part of your working with their supply chain organization. Now, before I jump into, okay, how do we create that score? We first have to talk about how do we define our system? Because what this is all about when I'm looking at my NIST 800-171 controls is the extent of the system that I need to secure. And the first thing you should do, or you should ask yourself is, okay, where do I receive controlled unclassified information? Who receives it? What systems is it received in? And then how does that controlled unclassified information flow through my organization? Which systems might it be stored in? What systems might be used to manipulate that information? Which users of those different systems have access to it, are doing that manipulation, or just looking at it to do, fairly mundane tasks sometimes, right? Respond to an RFP, invoice something, etc. And then how that data might be exiting your system. And is that only in IT systems? Are there physical locations where this information is stored, processed, or transmitted? So you also have to consider, how do I back it up? What's my disaster recovery, etc. When you want to take a look at users, take a look at, or consider those who support your systems, those MSPs, managed service providers, what, the ruling considers ESPs, external service providers, do any of their users have access, etc. That's the reason, the rule has that requirement that those folks also have that same CMMC level which you're trying to achieve. The other thing to look at is the system itself, if you will, the network diagram, the system diagram, if you will. And in this, you want to identify those different assets, including the people, right? There are people that actually interact with the CUI assets, right? The information you receive. There are people that, don't, right? And you should know them, right? And know that they're excluded from that. There are various security protection assets, your firewalls, your if you have like an Active Directory, or you're utilizing Microsoft's Entrada or Intune or something like that. Those things don't necessarily store, process, or transmit CUI, but they protect access to it, or they protect the endpoint on where that information might be stored. Those things should be noted as well. If you are utilizing a contractor, make sure you include those things in your diagram. Those specialized assets are systems that might be, on your factory floor. They might be CNC machines. Again, they don't necessarily store, process, or transmit CUI, but you may be putting various data from information in those. They, again, should be accounted for. They're not, they're not part of the CUI assets, but they should be recognized, noted as a specialized asset. You need to know kind of what controls you have around those, et cetera. So that data flow diagram and the system diagram are important because this is going to define the scope of the system. Because when that certified third party comes to do the assessment, they're going to ask you for your SSP, your system security plan. And that system security plan is going to define the scope of what they're going to assess. Are they going to assess your entire organization, or are they going to just assess a portion of your organization? The better you can define that scope and narrow it, right, the easier it will be for everybody to understand and know where that CUI is. There are 110 controls within NIST 800-171. They're broken up into 14 control families. They're not evenly split, right? There's 12 in some, 9 in the other, etc. But overall, 110 controls within these 14 categories of things. This isn't all about IT. There are things about awareness and training of of the people in the organization. There is physical security if you're storing, processing, or transmitting CUI, on documents or things like that. Physical security of the building. Those kinds of things are also considered part of those 110 controls. So it's not just about your IT organization. It is really about your entire organization. Now, this is how you start to do that assessment, right? You basically walk through each of those 110 controls. This is a sample of one of those controls, 3.1.3. In each of the controls, and this is from the NIST 800-171 Alpha, right? Alpha stands for the assessment guide. The assessment guide, and this itself is a URL to that. So when you get this presentation, you'll be able to show this up. This is a NIST publication. And it shows you that, okay, this security requirement control the flow of CUI in accordance with approved authorizations. So it's going to be a general statement like that for each of the controls. NIST isn't about telling you how to do those things. It's just telling you that this thing needs to be done. How you do it is kind of up to you. There are some things you're going to need to have in place. That's these determine if statements, right? So you're going to need information flow control policies. Do you have those things defined? In my data flow diagram, do I understand, why it moves from A to B, who handles it, things like that. The methods I have in control of that, user accounts, who has access to this particular machine, this particular segment, etc. Those sources and destinations, networks, individuals, devices. It enters my network via email. From email, it's often stored on this file share, or we print it out and we store it in this file cabinet. Who can grant access to those things, that authorization for controlling the flow, right? So these are the determine if. So you should have these things documented, these policies and procedures, as part of your overall system security plan. So you should have a policy and procedure in place for these things. Whoops, sorry, I didn't mean to go back yet. And then when the assessor comes in, this is what they're going to do. They're going to examine those policies and procedures. They're going to look at that information flow, those control policies, etc. They're going to look at the configuration settings, right? If you tell them that, hey, we store it here, and we store it based on an access control list, only certain people are given access to that, or only certain people have keys to the file cabinet, right? And this is how we determine who gets those keys, right? They're going to look for a log. They're going to look for who the approval process for those things. They're also going to interview individuals from your organization, either those who are responsible for that thing, and also maybe individual users to make sure they were trained correctly, understood the process, etc. Right? And then, and then they're going to test it, right? Oh, show me how you unlock CUI. Okay, I got my key, I go over to the file cabinet, I open it up, right? I lock it when I'm done, and these are my, my controls are, I don't leave this area that's marked for CUI. I only look at it in this area. I then close it up, store it again, all those kinds of things. So that's what they're going to do to assess you. And this is important because when you do your self-assessment and you generate your Sprs score, you're going to want to score yourself against those same things, right? If you haven't done one of these things or you don't have the full control implemented, then you haven't yet implemented that. You should note that, and you should create a plan of action and milestone to address that. Now, as you go through these, you're going to score yourself. So each of those 110 controls is worth 1, 3, or 5 points. That's why when you see a Sprs score, it can actually range from a negative 203 to 110. So, if you've got, all the ones done, but you got a bunch of negative 3s and negative 5s, your score is going to be in the negative realm. Not great, but you'll at least know what you need to fix. Now, the way the assessors are going to work, right? When they come in, they're not going to come in until you have a score at a minimum of at least 100 of 88. You got to at least have 75% of the controls completed. And you're only allowed to have, open items for controls worth 1 point. So if I look to engage with a C3 PAO and I send them a system security plan with a score of 33, they're going to say, sorry, we can't evaluate you yet. You've got to be up to 88. You got to have open POAMs against those 1 pointers that are allowed, and we'll assess you, but you've only got 180 days from that point to close those. So that's how you score this again, right? Against each of those 110 controls, you're going to say whether or not you comply or not, or you've implemented that control, I should say. That's the language they use, or not. And then you're going to give yourself, or you're going to subtract a point from the 110, you're going to subtract 3 points, or you're going to subtract 5 points. If you subtracted points, you should open a POAM against it. That should be assigned to an individual in the organization to close, and you should manage that closure of that POAM to completion, then go in, update that you've implemented that, rescore yourself, etc. So this is a program, if you will. It's not necessarily a one-time assessment. These are those controls, right? And again, these are from a document. It's this document down here on how to do the assessment methodology, right? So these are the controls that are worth 5 points. So if you haven't fully implemented 311, 312, etc., then you subtract 5 points from your 110 score. Same for the 3s. All the ones that aren't on here are 1s. And this document, you can obviously go in and see this in much more detail. So again, before you approach that third-party assessment organization, you're going to have a score of at least 88, and you can't have open POAMs against any of these 5 or 3s. It can only be 1 point, and these are the 1 point POAMs that you also can't have open, right? So these are, kind of those things that go into that SPRS score. Now, you can report any SPRS score, right? It doesn't have to be 88. 88 is going to be that determination of when that third party is willing to come in and do your assessment. When you go to win a contract under the CMMC rules, that contract will tell you which level you have to be at. If you haven't received that third party assessment and you haven't received that, good on the third party assessment, you won't be eligible for that contract because that's going to be one of the requirements, right? That's a DFARS clause, Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation, right? You have to be able to say that you comply with these in order to win that contract. So when I open a POAM, I should give certain information about it, right? Which control is it? Who's going to fix it? The plans I need to do that, and then I should manage this to completion. And I'll show you how this is done within Certification Assistant itself. I'm going to show you kind of how this whole thing is done in Certification Assistant, an application which walks you through this process, scores it for you, allows you to create those open POAMs, and then manage those things, and then we'll generate that system security plan, supporting documentation, et cetera. It gives you kind of that one place to place and share all this information out. Right. And then if you do have open POAMs, you got to resolve those within 180 days. If those are identified during the self-assessment, if for some reason that that third-party assessment organization found a problem, that's okay, right? That's what an assessment organization does. You can open a POAM and you're going to close that POAM within 180 days, and then that same organization is going to be the ones that come and do a reevaluation, and then they'll get you, and then they will, attest that you're certified and you're good to go. So hopefully this, that explanation gave you a good understanding of what's going on when we talk about generating that that assessment and that SPRS score. Now, Exostar provides our certification application. Whoops, let me actually jump into it. I timed myself out there. Certification Assistant to manage that overall process for you and to allow you to manage that CMMC program. This is going to walk you through that self-assessment process, allow you to put in, really all that information in one location that not only says whether or not I've complied with or I've implemented a particular control, but also the information about, the evidence that I've actually implemented that control, the policies and procedures that I have around that. If I don't have it implemented, I can create a POAM and a task associated to that POAM, and I can manage it to closure. So as you see, this current organization, right, we've got an SPRS score of 37. So, we're not ready yet to go to an assessor. We've got some work to do, and I'm going to kind of walk you through how we're going to do that. So to start, I click to enter into that CMMC NIST program. And the reason these terms are often, it's CMMC NIST or NIST 80171, mean CMMC, et cetera, is because what CMMC says is that you need to protect controlled unclassified information in accordance with NIST 80171. And CMMC is just that rule which says you've got to do that, and you now need that third-party attestation if you're looking to bid on these kinds of contracts. So the first thing we're going to go into is the plan builder. And this is where we're going to scope our system, right? So we're going to give it our name. Is this an enclave? So is this just a portion of my business, or is this the entire business, or is this an enterprise? What is my cage code? Because that's how I'm going to go into the SPR system, our name, our address, the number of people we have, the privileged users we have across our system, etc. This will be blank when you first enter into Certification Assistant. You'll fill it out, you'll edit it, if you will, and then you'll save it. Because we need that yearly attestation from the different stakeholders in my organization, I've got that ability to name those stakeholders so I can put this plan through its approval process. I can define that system environment, right? This is where I'm going to put that data flow diagram, that network diagram that describes my overall system for the assessment organization. I'm going to put in, my hardware. This is all the hardware I use. These are the software solutions that I utilize. And I'm going to, if I'm using Exostar's companion application Policy Pro, or I already have policies created for these things, I'm going to either upload those, though I actually probably wouldn't upload them here. I would link them because policies and procedures will change, they'll be updated, etc. So you'll put them up in, your shared directory, or you'll create them in Policy Pro, download them to your shared directory, and then link them here as that policy library. And then we're going to kick into that self-assessment. And this is going to walk us through those different control families, how we're doing against each of those, right? We've got 17 out of the 22 controls implemented. These are the ones we haven't implemented, which one's not applicable, etc. And when we go into it, we're going to look at a particular control family. This gives us that detail, right? If I've not implemented a particular control, I may have started to do some things about it. It's going to let me know when I've done those. If I want to, start updating this, if I'm working on this as one of my POAMs, I'm going to click into the control. I'm going to walk through those determine if statements. Here in the implementation statement is where I'm going to either cut and paste, link to, or write out how I fulfill this particular control, right? This is limit system access. So how do I do that? What is my procedure for limiting system access? What are the additional information? This is hints, if you will, additional information of where I might look to do these things. So this helps me build out that particular policy or procedure. This links to that policy library that I have over my overall controls. If I have done something for this particular control, I should have evidence that I've done that. So this artifact upload is where I would either link to like the configuration file of my system that is limiting access. I might link to a directory of who has access, physical access to the file cabinet where we're maintaining CUI. So again, I want to keep all of that information together, so I'm going to link those things here. So when that assessor comes in, we're basically going to walk through this, and I'm going to show them my policy, my procedure, my evidence. If this particular control has a requirement to periodically review or do something like that, I would create a workflow task around that and say, I need to do this daily, weekly, monthly thing. And this allows me to say I did it. But if I don't have this implemented, right, and this one is not implemented, I would create an action item. And that action item would be the POAM that I generate against this. Now, I'm going to cheat a little bit and say, look, I've actually implemented this control. I've got my determine ifs done. I've got all my supporting evidence. I've got my artifacts, etc. I'm going to save those changes. And now when I implement this particular control, that's going to update my SPRS score out in the front because now I've implemented a particular control. And I can go out and see that now my SPRS score, right, because this is doing that automatically, I was at 37. Now I'm at 42 because that was one of those 5-point controls. When did I last update, etc. And as I go through each of those different controls, I can also get the approval done of my overall plan. And I can generate that system security plan for my organization at any time. So this is, kind of that process to manage that overall CMMC program, generate that SPRS score for you, and provide you that single point of truth, if you will, for how you're doing for your CMMC program, gives you that one location where all that information is. So with that, we're going to kind of move on to the next area, just kind of a recap of what you saw, right? So Certification Assistant allowed me to build that system, put in those diagrams, network diagrams, data flow diagrams, etc., that define my overall system, including those users and assets, allowed me to walk through each of those different controls and build my overall program. If I don't have a particular control done, I can open that plan of action and milestones and then manage that to closure. I can then update my plan and update my Sprs score when those things are done. And since that overall risk score affects my contractual ability with others in the DIB, when I improve that score, I want to go into the SPRS system, enter my score, and update it. So there are different versions of Certification Assistant, standard or premium. There are partner collaboration capabilities within it. So Exostar has a network of partners out there. If you want to engage with an MSP, MSSP, somebody to do a readiness assessment, etc., you need help with an implementation of a particular control, you can invite those Exostar partners into your instance of Certification Assistant so they can work with you on those controls. You'll get message and alerts via email from the system itself when these things are due, when a date's been missed, etc. This is part of Exostar's CMMC Ready suite. We've already kind of touched on each of these different portions as well, right? We have a companion application called Policy Pro. Policy Pro provides you templates for the policies across the different control families. You then go in and update those templates based on your organization and how you might have implemented something. You can then score those policies using its AI engine. It'll give you an indicator of how good that policy is. It gives you a numeric score of that policy. It also gives you key indicators of what you might need to do to, address some shortcomings, improve that policy, etc. When you finish those, you export them from Policy Pro or you import ones you've already written, right? You may already have some existing policies. You can use Policy Pro against those as well. You put them in, a shared drive or another location, again, because you're going to want to maintain these over time. That becomes your policy library, which you can link to in Certification Assistant as you go through that overall CMMC assessment and use that as your central repository for all the information as it builds up that system security plan. It becomes that single source of truth across that system security plan. It's what you can utilize with the assessor to explain how you do things, where the evidence is, etc. If as part of your overall program, you need a place to store, process, or transmit controlled unclassified information, Exostar has our managed Microsoft 365 solution. This is a secure enclave up in Azure's GCC High environment built over a Teams environment with an Exostar application with roles, permissions, logical separation, etc., that provide you that secure location to store, process, or transmit that CUI that you may receive. This, we have a shared responsibility matrix that attests to the 85 of the 110 NIST 800-171 controls that Exostar implements on the enclave, and then also outlines those additional 25 controls that you're responsible for or it's shared with Exostar. We provide that body of evidence because this is that FedRAMP moderate equivalent cloud solution that you can utilize to help you satisfy your overall CMMC program. And then I also talked about we have a number of third parties that can work with you to do readiness assessments, do an overall CMMC assessment. This does include some C3PA organizations, so when the CMMC rule is finalized, you can engage with them to get that third party assessment as well. So I'm going to open a poll while I answer questions. Would love to have you guys answer the poll while I go through this. So I get the feedback of how I did today, also get some feedback on how we can improve our overall program. So I'm going to cover the questions I got submitted before. So first one, how can I improve my score? Pretty easy. The best way you can improve your SPRS score is to implement controls that you haven't yet implemented. Every control you implement will improve by 1, 3, or 5 points your overall score. Number 2, we're a small business under 15 employees. Any suggestions for implementation? So for small organizations, I typically do recommend that you engage with particular tools or vendors, etc., that you're comfortable with, that meet the requirements of what you're trying to achieve, because small organizations, you're gonna struggle to understand everything you need. It's better to get kind of an enclave, utilize a third party, work with you to get those things. When are we required to be CMMC certified? So the CMMC program should be finalized that first quarter of 2025. And then there'll be that implementation period. But remember, you won't be able to bid on those contracts until you are CMMC certified. Most people think it's a 6-month effort from if you've got nothing done today to get that. So you'll want to start as soon as possible. So when contracts where that is required start to appear and you want to compete for those, you're going to have to want it, you're going to want to be able to have that done. So how to get a score without certification assistant. So hopefully I showed you that as part of the presentation today. You can use the 800-171 Alpha, the assessment guide, and the scoring guide that goes along with that. And you'll have these links in this presentation. And you'll go through each of those individual controls, score yourself, whether or not you've implemented it or not, and then either take away 5, 3, or 1 point if you haven't implemented something, and that'll derive your overall score. So how can a very small business with less than 5 employees, all working remotely, best address? So this is very similar to number 2, right? Really the best way to kind of do that with the small organizations, remote, etc., is to try to utilize as much as you can from cloud solution providers that are FedRAMP moderate or FedRAMP moderate equivalent, which provide you kind of that one-stop shop for that. You may want to engage with that third-party organization to do an overall assessment as well. So is a CMMC program generated internally to machine a customer's part considered CUI? Now, the part of this is going to, and I hate to say this, but it is going to depend a little bit. So if you're just taking information from a CUI document, specs, etc., and you're putting that into it, and there's no other way to identify it, then the program itself may very well not be CUI. If the end product is labeled with identifiers that link it back to a particular program, that program is sending you information that is CUI, etc., then it may be. And it's kind of up to you to determine or ask your contracting officer whether it is. But for most folks, CMMC work and the work done on those machines, it's not CUI, but it does need to be noted in your diagram as that specialized asset. And it should be noted as such. And you should, kind of know who uses it, who's got access to it, how they use it, etc. So as part of this, also provide you some additional information from different useful sources. This does include links to the free trials of both Certification Assistant and Policy Pro. Please feel free to sign up for a trial, see if it works for you, see if it makes sense for your particular organization. You can order this, directly from Exostar as well, right? There's a buy now button on each of those pages where the trial is. You can either start a free trial, you can purchase now, etc. All right, some additional questions I got in. Let's see. So how long is the free trial? So it's a 15-day free trial. If, as you start to use it, if you're just trying to see kind of where you are in level 1, you can certainly use it for that. You can upgrade it anytime from the light version, which gets you that level 1, to the full Certification Assistant, really anytime during that process. Because you may be an organization that is level 1 today, but you're looking to move to bid on level 2 and things like that. So you can certainly do that as well. What does it take to get the policies from Policy Pro to Certification Assistant? That really is just a simple download. So when you create the policies in Policy Pro, you'll have the ability to download those. I recommend that you download those to a shared drive within your organization because you'll want to create, kind of version control across these. So, if you make a change, if you get a new technology, etc., you'll want to address that in the policy. You'll want to note that, make that change, and then, upload the new version to that same location. And then in Certification Assistant, you'll want to use that link to that location. That way, whenever you update it, that link will still have the latest version of the policies. You may also have to update your procedures based on, kind of your changes in policies. You would do that in Certification Assistant. And then, you're still compliant, right? You haven't gone out of compliance. You've just adjusted some policies and procedures to fit your business needs, the technologies, et cetera, that you use. So if an IT company handles security, what information or documents should they be provided to ensure we are compliant? So one of the things to remember here is that the system security plan is from your organization. So your organization needs a system security plan. Now, you may utilize a third party to do a portion of that or even all of it, but it's going to be your system security plan. So they should provide to you, if you will, if your agreement is that they're going to be your outsourced IT and that they're responsible for CMMC compliance, then they should provide to you a complete system security plan, explain that to you, make sure that it meets all 110 controls, and and that it's maintained in that manner. Now, they may need some information from you to fill that out, and that's going to be all of those things that fit into what's just responsible for your organization. So maybe you're responsible for training your people, right? So you're going to have to possibly provide the policy and procedure for how you do that to that third party that might be responsible for the overall thing. So, this is, I know a lot of people want that, look, you just do it. And I understand that, but it's going to be your plan and your system security plan signed off by your company executive. So just keep that in mind when you start to think about outsourcing some of this stuff, who I work with, etc. Is there a dollar threshold for needing NIST self-assessments for PO processing? So a number of people use Exostar to get into various prime contractors' supply chain portals where they process, purchase orders and things like that. So I think this question is against that. And I don't know. This would be a question you really should ask of your contracting officer. Because I know there are a number of the primes out there that are sending questionnaires about SPRS score and those kinds of things. And, if they may have a requirement. Exostar itself doesn't have one. The DoD doesn't necessarily have one, but the primes may have one of who they'll do business with, what scores, etc. And then on the ETA, I think we covered this as part of the overall session. That was one of the first slides on that implementation timeline. We expect CMMC to be finalized again in the first quarter of 2025. It will then start to appear in DoD contracts as one of those DFARS clauses that you need to be CMMC level X, Y, or Z, or 1, 2, or 3 for this. So that's how it will work. And if you're bidding on a contract that says you have to be CMMC level 2, you'll have to be CMMC level 2 to fulfill and bid on that contract. So with that, I want to thank everybody. Now, we do have another webinar next week with one of our partners, Network Coverage. Bridget's going to come on and talk about some affordable compliance strategies for CMMC for the SMBs out there. Bridget and Network Coverage are one of Exostar partners that can satisfy a number of your requirements around CMMC compliance and adherence with those NIST 800-171 controls. Now, I apologize I didn't get to many of the questions that came over the chat. I know a number of you answered other people's questions, and I appreciate that greatly. I love that kind of interaction. And I want to thank you all for your time and attendance today. Again, I appreciate your feedback on the poll. If I will go back through the chat, if there aren't any questions there are questions that weren't answered, I'll try to get those answers, excuse me, to the folks that submitted those. So, excuse me. Again, thank you for your time and attention today. Hope everybody has a great rest of the week, and hopefully we'll be seeing you soon. Take care.